And we should be live. Okay. Right. Well, we're just waiting for James Linton to join us. He's running a bit behind. So hopefully he'll be here in a bit. And while I just get the tweets sorted out and various other bits sorted out so that everyone can join in, Ruby, if you could introduce yourself and a bit about what you do.
Yeah, sure. Gladly. So I'm Ruby Aronashvili. I'm the founder and the CEO of a company called Psy, based in Israel. My professional background is coming from a rich military background, in which I was the founder and the head of the Israeli Red Team for 7 years. Later in 2012, I founded Psy, and since then I'm leading the company as the CEO and looking forward to this session.
Okay, and we've just got James joining now. So, James, obviously you were somewhat famous for some of the email spoofing you've done. And I know that you've done a lot since then. If you can just do an introduction for the people who don't know who you are.
Yeah, sure. I'm James Linton. I was a designer, a web designer for the vast majority of my career. And then due to a small disagreement with my bank, went on a bit of a social engineering, I guess it was like a spontaneous pen test. It wasn't hugely malicious. I wasn't after money or anything, but after successfully passing myself off as the chairman of a particular bank, I just got a bit of an itch that needed scratching, and I just kind of went on from there, kind of culminating in getting members of the White House to reply to me, to accept my invitations to parties and things. So I guess that kind of, everyone likes to be good at something. I say this, and it felt nice that I was in my head and in my ego cleverer than all these CEOs with Harvard degrees and stuff. And it just got me really interested about, because at the time I was grossly naive to cyber threats generally. So over the last 3 years, it really has been a kind of, in terms of the learning curve, obviously I went from the pranks. I then went to work for a email security company, and as a kind of, again, social engineering against scammers that were targeting their client base and stuff, and reading their correspondence, and just really immersing myself 24/7 almost in the kind of what was going on, because it was a story that really interested me, I guess. I went from not really having any kind of, apart from obviously being a designer, I'd spot badly designed phishing emails that would land in my inbox and stuff, and I would pick up on mistakes there, but I didn't really understand what lay behind it, and I kept digging to the back of that. And then I guess I was always bringing it back to the bigger picture. How do we solve this? Which, isn't something to be done in an afternoon, but it's that kind of Rubik's Cube that, I don't know, a lot of people, I think, find really, really interesting.
And on that, I mean, this is to talk about a particular type of attack using similar things. So, Ruby, obviously, you detected it. You've been analysing it, looking into it since. Do you want to give us the background there? Tell us how it happened, how it came up, and how you've been monitoring it?
Yeah, sure. So it goes back to around 2.5 months ago, when we started to work with one of our US-based customers. It all started by an email that we've got from the insurance company saying that our claim is now fully paid, and they were happy to serve us, and it was great to hear that we trust them, and they are our preferred insurance company, which looked very weird to our customer, of course. So they asked us if we understand what's going on, and they suspected actually that the email that we've got with the attachment was malicious. So we've analyzed that, and we saw that it was legitimate and actually authentic. So we contacted the insurance company to understand what was the situation there, and then they started to send us all the relevant emails. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yep, you're back.
Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. Um, then they sent us all the relevant emails, and we saw that actually someone sent an email on the customer's behalf to the insurance company with a claim that was something around $1,000. So a very small one, nothing very significant. It's a property claim. And based on that, the insurance started to roll out really the claim process. And 2 weeks later, they paid the claim to the specific bank account that was attached to the original email asking for the claim. So several mistakes that were done here, as you can imagine. They paid to an account that wasn't the registered account. The email was sent as spoofed email, but this was actually a problem of our customers because the email configuration or security configuration was not set right, specifically the DMARC configuration. If you want, we can dive into that. But the point is that they were able to just spoof an email on behalf of our customer asking for the claim. And in the reply, by the way, they put another email that looks similar, but it's not the same domain. So they started with a spoofed email, and then the insurance company replied to a different email, and then the attacker was able actually to communicate directly with a different email, even not the spoofed one, in order to create two-way conversation. After this initial one, we started to search specifically for this kind of attacks in other customers, and we found multiple of those. That means different customers that got the same email or similar email from different insurance companies saying that the claim was paid, and because they didn't ask for any claim, they just ignored it and put it aside, and no one cared. So all in all, we saw something around 40 or 50 cases like this. Again, all in all, we are talking here about 50,000 or 60,000 US dollars. So it's not a lot. However, usually it's either one of the two, right? Either we are seeing some kind of tool testing before something more significant, or we are looking at something that works at scale that we don't see, of course, the entire scale here, that makes it very, let's say, cost efficient for the attacker to initiate this kind of operation for this kind of claims. But this was the process of how we identified it.
Okay, so there was no automated system. It was all person to person between the spoofed business and the insurance company.
It could have been automated because the emails are quite straightforward. So that's something that you can definitely automate. But I think that the original one that we saw was definitely manual because of also some typos and mistakes that we've seen there. Later, it looked like the same structure over and over again. So,
okay. So the attackers are automated, but the insurance companies are processing the emails manually, reading them through. James, that sounds like your area through and through. So it's relying on the people, no malicious attachments, no clever tech, just a bit of spoofing.
Yeah, well, perhaps a very clever idea behind it all. I mean, it kind of draws parallels with where criminals kind of age accounts or create an account and then try and not trip over the initial sort of tripwires of that the algorithms are looking for. So they'll make, very low value payments. They'll make sure they do a bit of surfing around and maybe put a few items in the basket. Maybe they'll buy something of low value and have it shipped by, one of the more sort of cheaper ways of shipping and stuff. And they'll often do that to try and create the conditions for a less kind of restricted account that they can then use to extract, greater funds from. Normally this is used for carding. So, I mean, potentially in that scenario, if they're just taking 1,000 at a time or something similar to that, could they have then come back and gone for a larger amount, or would that have hit more, I don't know, more kind of red tape and would have got slowed down? Would there have been an amount they could have gone for afterwards using the same process to that already kind of verified bank account. Would there have been much to kind of stop them from doing that? Because that would possibly be what what I would do next step along. If you've already got a kind of line in the water, it would seem good to maybe, even if you left it for 6 months, 7 months, to come back and go, all right, we've got the claim for this, and have it paid into exactly the same account. The only problem with that is that these accounts can often not have the longest life. It depends really how it's been set up and how it's been managed by the criminal. But obviously, to keep changing the account would be a red flag, I would guess. But I'd be interested to know if any of them did return for a second claim.
And nothing that we've seen yet in the same account. So most of the things that we've seen were always one-timers. But again, this is really new. So we don't know. Maybe in the near future, we'll see another attempt. But for now, everything that we've seen was one time per customer.
Right.
So it's entirely possible that there's loads of these going on, picking up different insurance companies and seeing which ones are susceptible. And then, as James said, in 3 months, 6 months, they'll come back and go, oh, we've had something bigger happen. The office has burned down.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's. I would be surprised if they didn't, because obviously they want to sort of make a return and find out where the limits are, where extra checks come in, and where the deception stops working. So I would be surprised that over 50 of them, if it was the same gang, they didn't start, gradually, $1,500, $2,000, just to try and get an idea of where it cut off and wouldn't work. But I guess they were still finding their feet. But I mean, they will be, quite enthusiastic about pursuing this, at different places if it's worked. Obviously, $50,000, especially if you're from a country where that's worth a hell of a lot, is a good return for a few emails and a bank account.
Yeah, and we would definitely anticipate, let's say in the future, that the same attackers will, in a way, map the capabilities of the insurance companies, as James just mentioned, and those that are more, let's say, easy on the payments, and those that didn't ask a lot of questions would probably be more targeted than others, I guess. And I guess that there is some kind of attempt to identify where is the limit, right? Because on $1,000 you don't see a lot of bureaucracy around that. But if it was a claim of $1 million, then it was totally different. So I guess there is some kind of try here of attempt to try and understand where is the limit, like what is the threshold from which things are starting to get a little bit more complex. But the point is that, seeing that at the beginning, when you see it as one-time case, it doesn't make a lot of sense. When you say it 50 times, it makes some kind of sense. And if I need to guess, we'll see that much more in the future, and then it would make a lot of sense, because then, as you said, the infrastructure is very low, like you're talking about spoofed email. And actually, that's it. I mean, other than the fact that you need a bank account to receive the money and so on, but that's a very easy process if you are already trained and you've done something like this before. So that's something that is, I guess, will be a more, let's say, a common situation that we'll see in the near future.
Was there a pattern to the bank accounts they were providing, or?
Sorry?
Was there a pattern to the bank accounts they were using? Were they kind of specific to one country, or were they local, or?
Most of them were in the US, which is, at least at the beginning, I was surprised to see that. But yeah, most of them in the US, but not the same bank account, not the same country, not the same city. So quite distributed. Of course, we've seen several going to the same bank account, so it's not that it was a one-to-one connection, but there were several of those in different locations. Yeah.
I wonder if they were using because they get abused quite a lot over there, the kind of prepaid cards that also have a checking account, but they do have quite low initial limits on them. So that could be a reason why they kept it to a smaller
Low.
amount, I guess.
Might be the case, definitely, in which they can really consume, let's say, cash goods and products very quickly using a prepaid cards and so on. That can be one of the reasons. But I guess that it's still something that is a little bit, let's say, investment that you need to do to make in order to get those bank accounts open. That is more, let's say, overwhelming than just having something easier to use, like I don't know, bitcoins or something that would be much easier for them. However, I think that the value for money for the attackers is there. Otherwise, I don't see any reason why do that. Why doing that, right? So there is definitely something that we don't know yet, from my point of view, because still with technical infrastructure for attack is very cheap. You don't need anything other than a mail account or access to an SMTP server to send an email. That's easy. Getting the money, that's a little bit more complicated, because you can imagine that in every case that an insurance company sees some kind of fraud, they are starting some kind of investigation. Although I have to say that in most cases, the insurance companies that we've discussed with, they didn't take it so seriously. So from their point of view, $1,000 is definitely below the threshold. So in a lot of the cases, not all of them, but in a lot of the cases, nothing happened later. That means there was no investigation other than just official claim, or official complaint to the authorities. But that's it. It stopped there. See, which means that also. Yeah.
No, sorry.
Go ahead. No, I'm saying that.
I'll hold my
I'm saying that
quiet.
I'm saying that with the fact that no one is doing anything about it, that's also something that probably is one of the considerations there, because you say that the probability for someone chasing you for this amount is so low, then that's something that probably worth the investment. So that's also one of the considerations, I guess. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I guess that this is one of the considerations.
Yeah. Oh, completely. I mean, behaviors change because of consequences normally, and to a large number of cyber-based crimes, there's no practical sort of law enforcement consequence. That's just the reality of it. They build their own evidence, obviously, but most of these criminals will know that. I think if it's not successful, then it's not even seen as being criminal in their eyes. And even when it is successful, they kind of know if it's of a low denomination, then it's just not going to get resolved, because they're quite expensive cyber-related things to put something on. And I've seen amounts an awful lot higher than that just haven't reached the threshold at which people start to really delve into it. And it's kind of frustrating, I guess, we're seeing that sort of no man's land that is so lawless, I guess.
I'm just curious about something you said earlier on, because Ruby, you mentioned that the first emails you saw looked like they were manual, and then since then they've looked very similar. Is it a case of the first ones looked like they'd just been typed out to test an idea, and then suddenly they all started looking the same after that?
Yeah, we don't know if that's the same threat actor, so there might be several of those walking around. So, we see a subset of what happened. So we don't know if we see a trend in the picture, but let's say if we see, or if we take into consideration only the sample that we have, so definitely you see that at the beginning things are a little bit more free language and free, and later becomes more and more structured. So same request, same response, more or less, and with some different, let's say, response in specific questions that are not anticipated. Then you see that even the response came a little bit later. So we've seen that if there was a question that was not a regular question, then the response came like 1 day later and not like 5 seconds later. So like we've seen in most cases, right? So again, we can speculate a lot of things here. What happened? Like maybe you have a smart system that is trying to answer the questions, and if there's something that is not anticipated, then it goes to a human being. But that sounds like something very sophisticated, and I don't know if that's the case. It might be, but I don't really know. It might be just by mistake or something that is a coincidence. But I can't say because the sample that we've seen, I consider it to be very small. Because I assume that if we've seen 40 or 50 cases, there are at least 5,000 cases out there that we are not familiar with. So that 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 will be definitely interesting to see. And one of the reasons that I wanted to join this session is really to see whether we get more, let's say, insights with regards to this specific attack. If someone here listens and has something similar that he can tell, that will be very interesting to understand or to attribute this threat group or threat source, if that's one, two, three, or more than that, right? That will be very interesting. But that will be definitely one of the items that we will keep investigating in our company in the near future to see where it goes.
So
in terms of who they were reaching out to when they were initially emailing, was there a consistency to who they were reaching out to, or was it fairly untargeted and then it was narrowed down and they were passed to the correct person? I'm not sure. I'm not very clear on how the rectifying of a claim would go if you were reaching out initially via email. Is it kind of fairly general and then it gets narrowed down, or were they reaching out to somebody who already had experience of that client or that industry? Or
yeah, so I guess that they have some kind of previous knowledge, but it's not very difficult. I mean, you have an account manager usually. If you think about it, you target, you go to LinkedIn, go to the account managers of, let's say, big companies. You take, for example, food industry. You take a specific insurance company. You see what account managers are out there, and then you're just targeting them directly. That is quite easy when you know who to target. But I guess that at least at the beginning, you need to have some kind of information on the process. So either you've done a claim yourself in the past, which is of course very common, or you have some kind of inside information from the insurance company or from the company that was targeted at the beginning. Later, after you've done that once, twice, then I guess it's quite obvious how that works. But I guess that the first times were a little bit more complicated there, yeah.
I mean, we're well aware that information does leak from insurance companies. Everyone's had robocalls about you've been in an accident which wasn't your fault, and some of those are actually off the back of genuine incidents. So there is a possibility of it coming from there. With the claims themselves, what are they for? Are they for losses, breakages, damage? Is there any pattern to them, or?
Yeah, mainly what we've seen it's property damage, like something that is broken or something that was ruined by some kind of either rain, wind, or something similar. That is easy to have an easy claim against. But yeah, most of them, I don't think that I've seen something that is not property claim. So to be clear, I think all of them were property claim. Maybe I'm missing one thing or two things, but I think that it was quite common between all of the cases that we've seen.
Okay.
So would they provide any? I guess with a property claim like that, they wouldn't have to provide a receipt if it was something stolen like a camera. Then it would probably require some sort of paperwork for that. Whereas I guess the property claims a bit more. We take you at your word, or is that the case?
So I think that for a low amount in general, you don't need to provide anything. I mean, you have like 5 or 10,000 in your insurance policy that you can claim without any proofs. That means that without any evidence, that means that you can just claim for those. And I think that was the point that was abused here. From the emails that we've seen, we didn't see any evidence or any kind of trying, let's say, an attempt to try and explain or to prove that you had the damage. That was the whole point why we found it so beautiful, right, as an attack, because you just ask, okay, I have a damage here. We estimate it, or our professionals estimated this specific one in, I don't know, $500, $700, $1,000, and the insurance company just go with you again because it's so low. Even for the insurance company to send someone to check that will cost them more if you think about it. So that's why in some, again, the threshold can be 5,000, 10,000, 50,000, depending who the company is. And we found that really that is very efficient when you try to get claims in this low amount. So you don't need to prove anything.
Wow.
I guess it will change. I guess it will change in the near future, right? If that will be abused more and more. But for now, that's the situation.
I'm just trying to think about that. So you've seen 40, 50 cases, looking at a few companies. I'm assuming the target companies are large ones and the spoofed customers are large ones as well, rather than tiny businesses. So they've got policies that can absorb it. Is it possible to give or to have an idea of how big it might actually be? Because you've picked up on a few samples. There's huge numbers of claims going on all the time. I mean, it's entirely possible. You suggested there might be 5,000. There could be a lot more than that. In the aggregate, that's going to be a lot more. That's going to be well within the sort of critical risk appetite for some insurance companies if you start adding them all together rather than looking at them as individual cases. Either James or Ruby, is there any way to get that sort of picture together to try and analyze all the data? James, you were talking about commonalities between them. It sounds like it should be something that's being looked at a bit more seriously.
Yeah, I mean, it's as with anything that has huge amounts of data that maybe overlaps with other stuff, it costs a lot of money to start interrogating it normally. That's why it always makes me laugh when there's a big data leak, because I'm like, God, yeah, good luck trying to view all that. It's I guess that's a bit of a blockage, but yeah, I guess this is one of the huge problems with cyber, that if you could suddenly find out the relationship of everything almost instantly, then you would, you'd cure everything. I mean, you cause a huge amount of problems as well, but it's joining all those bits together in the very narrow, I guess. Being able to spot spoofs through whatever technology might be enough to protect you from this in the short term. If that's one of the main methods they're doing, then you're probably best to try and tighten that up than you are to try and mitigate it with any processes, which are probably just going to become a bit cumbersome, I guess, to try and root out these out of the general claims that are going in. Yeah, tech and awareness. It always comes back to that, doesn't it?
Ruby, you mentioned about DMARC not being properly set up.
Yeah.
So if it is set up properly, I'm assuming this, and people actually pay attention, I'm assuming this just goes away.
Yeah, DMARC actually ensures server-to-server authentication. That means that when your email server is trying to authenticate on the behalf of your domain, the other server can actually ensure or authenticate your server and make sure that this email is authentic. Then it's also, depends on behavior and on the policy of the DMARC. That means that sometimes the DMARC policy can send the email to spam, sometimes to quarantine, and really depends on how the organization deals with it. But anyhow, once it's set correctly, at least you get some kind of alert either on the sending side or on the receiving side, and you can start working with that. If, let's say, in an ideal situation, everyone had DMARC set correctly, I mean SPF for internal authentication and DMARC for external authentication, and that would, in a way, solve the issue, at least from authenticated point of view. Of course, if you have a compromised account, like if I was able to compromise an account of someone in the organization, the same attack can of course work. But again, the level of complexity of this attack is a little bit higher already, okay, than just sending a spoofed email. So from my point of view, if the attack becomes a little bit more expensive to execute, that might be also the threshold where the attacker find it not relevant or not interesting anymore. So a simple configuration change in this case, again, DMARC, for the organization can definitely help a lot. So it won't be 100% protection because there are other parameters to consider, but definitely raise the bar, raise the cost for the attacker to work harder, and also limit the, let's say, the attack surface in this case.
So I think we've all seen on emails, this person might be trying to impersonate one of the people you've spoken with before. James, that's been around for a few years now. You do a lot on social engineering. Does it make that much difference, having that warning pop up saying this person's trying to impersonate one of your contacts?
I mean, it should do. If it pops up daily, then obviously it would lose its appeal. I've never personally had a cause for it to pop up at my end, so to speak. But I can't see how. I mean, it depends on the level of the threat, I think, and the role that the person who's receiving that email has got. If they're heavily involved in accounting and finance, then you need different policies, I think, than somebody who wouldn't be able to transfer huge amounts of money or things like that. So I think each role has to be assessed differently, and obviously you've got actual data to work with. You know who's targeting, or hopefully you do, your staff at various times, so you can start to mitigate that, I think. But yeah, it needs to speak back to your email ecosystem, because otherwise you're just kind of locked in. And quite rightly, you initially trust everything that's there. It's in the scammer's hands to make you distrust it, whether it's just not plausible. That's a huge one that seems to, especially when I spent almost 2 years kind of corresponding with scammers back and forth to extract bank accounts and things like this from them. And some of them are just ridiculously bad at it. They shouldn't even be included in a report. They are that terrible. And they've been stopped by the technology anyway, but there are a few out there that actually, do take pride in what they do and are a genuine threat to Corporation X or whatever. So, yeah, it's. I think the more you can not be at one, that sounds all very zen, but spot the cadence of your email inbox and have things kind of be, having dialogue boxes and things like this, it is a good thing, I think.
Yeah, but from my point of view, if you leave it to the person in the end, right, a person will always find a way to make a mistake, unfortunately, right? We always say that there is no patch for human stupidity, so I was aiming more for a technology, let's say, a solution in this case. That means if the infrastructure is able to block the email for you, that would be great. If it's only an alert, I can assure you that with the right social engineering work around that email, you are able to make anyone click anything in your organization. We've done social engineering attacks in the past that included files like virus.exe with don't click on this file, it's going to harm your computer, and still people with the right, let's say, incentive there, downloaded files, open those files on their own PCs, or clicked links and provided their personal credentials. So we saw that so many times. So from my point of view, if the technology doesn't solve it, then you have a percentage, at least a minimal percentage, in which that you are going to be successful as the attacker. So we have to let's say, to reduce the dependency on the human factor as much as we can. And I mean, the point of DMARC and SPF, if those are configured correctly, the infrastructure should work for you and not the human in the end. So that is the message here.
So with DMARC and SPF, they're not actually hard to configure. They're not expensive to configure. And Carlton on LinkedIn has just pointed out there are a lot of email filtering solutions on the market. I know there's also a lot of phishing training solutions. There's all sorts of things out there, and there have been
Yep.
for years. And it's now just a commodity you can add to your system. Given that, why are we still having this problem? Why are we having a brand new, or possibly brand new, for all we know it's an old attack vector that's just been reawakened, but brand new attack vectors which are doing nothing more than spoofing emails? Why are they still popping up and working? That's to both of you. So James, I know you'll have a perspective on that. Ruby, you're dealing with one at the moment and you've got an idea of the landscape. It's just an open question.
I think it's just so big and complicated, the internet. I think there's just so many layers and different technologies at work there that it is kind of tricky to make it 100% safe. I don't think things are in terrible shape, but it was flawed from the off, and I kind of see that cyber criminals as well. They've kind of had, maybe this is the second generation-ish of them, so they are starting to probably hit their stride now. This isn't a long development. We're not in kind of Blade Runner territory now. So they are getting better at it, and the lateral thinking to try and I want to replicate this payment, low-level payment to somebody who's claiming. How do I do that and stuff? Like you say, the building blocks of that have been in use for over a decade in different stuff, and it's just shifting about the usage for them and things. So what could have started from a glint in somebody's eye when they claim for house damage, and they weren't asked to back it up, all of a sudden that's a thing that can be used against them. So I think it's tricky, and technology is by far and away the thing that needs to do the heavy lifting, because otherwise you completely ruin the benefits of email if you constantly got to be paranoid. I always see it as like a customs checkpoint, and the employee's been told, right, you've had your customs training, don't let any contraband through here at all. Okay, you got that, and they'll be like, well, okay, can I take apart every car that comes through that? No, we haven't got time for that. you can report the odd car to IT, and that's it. And they're like, well, I can't block everything then. And that's the kind of trap that they're in, I think, where an employee can't sit down and go through the headers of every email and check that they're not being duped. The technology has to do all that side of things. So having the best technology is always going to be the key thing, I think, with making the internet, which is flawed, email, which is flawed, safe enough to use in a business environment. It's maybe not quite so important outside of that in some respects. And maybe, some of the, Apple seems to have a fairly laissez-faire attitude towards, email, kind of making things more secure. It takes two clicks before you actually get through to the actual email address from a sender and stuff like that. And I think they could maybe do a bit more, generally, whilst I'm having a rant about it. But yeah, it's up to the tech companies to keep driving it forward. And there's some great ones out there that are doing some really interesting and decent stuff. And, I love email, and it's nice to see that it's not dying off yet. But if we're not careful, then, something else will start to slide in and take over the business transactional side of things. And that will then leave all the kind of lower hanging through the small and medium sized businesses to just get feasted on by scammers. So it's a way of balancing act, I think. And technology, I think, has to do all the main work for people.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just thinking this through, that obviously insurance fraud is a very old thing. Even claims on other people's behalf are quite old. There were letters written back when insurance was starting out to do this sort of thing. But I'm just wondering, you said the first case of this was detected about 2.5 months ago.
Yeah.
I'm just
What
thinking.
What we've seen, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking the cash for crash scams and automotive scams, their business model, because it is a business model, is going to have been hit really hard recently, just with the massive drop in driving, the massive drop in incidents, people not traveling. Is there a possibility that this is actually a criminal startup pivoting to a new fraud model because their normal line's gone down and they know the insurance world?
Yeah, the criminal world has to keep the innovation going, right? Because we've seen a lot of very sophisticated, let's say, attacks and new techniques and new capabilities that always, when you look at it, you say, "Oh, that's smart." And I think they have to. I mean, if they want to stay in business, they have to reinvent themselves on a continuous basis. Um, so I'm sure that there is some kind of connection here. I'm sure that it's connected to the COVID situation in a way. We don't see the connection immediately, but what you just said might be a very interesting interpretation of the situation. I mean, I can't say that for sure, but if I need to guess, I think that there is a very strong correlation between the items. Yeah.
Behind the spoof email, were they using webmail accounts or were they using kind of registered domains for that?
Registered domains.
All right, okay. And these were fairly similar to the ones they were spoofing, I guess.
Yeah, very similar, like one letter difference. Either like company X, or then you see like company Y. This would be the difference, right? One letter difference, something that is very easy to miss. Usually, you take something that is singular and move it to plural with just adding an S or something similar. But that is really the majority of the cases. In some cases, we've seen also Gmail accounts, like company X at gmail.com. Which worked as well after the original communication, right? Original communication was spoofed and then leading to a Gmail account, but it worked from at least the results were the same in the end, right? So sometimes
Yeah.
registered account, and in some few cases, we've seen also Gmail. Yeah.
I mean, we used to see hundreds of Gmail accounts used, and they more or less come with inbuilt deliverability, just because it's such a well established name on the internet. There's loads of little benefits for them. There's the actual sender, obviously their IP address will just get ripped out as a matter of course. Obviously, you might be able to get it if you've subpoenaed Google, but if you're receiving a scam email, unless you put a kind of tracking link in there and they've enabled images or whatever, then you've got no kind of, it'll just go back to a Google data center. So there's an awful lot of abuse of Gmail accounts. It's ridiculous. Whereas conversely, kind of Hotmail, Outlook accounts, we saw, I could probably count it on one or two hands, whereas Gmail is just prolific. And yeah, it's such a, it's weird how these free bits of infrastructure just kind of get taken over for criminal enterprise. This was the bit that always kind of interested me, how, business tools, whether it was buying verified leads of chief financial officers and stuff, all these tools that are meant to make genuine business, law-abiding business, move more slowly and be more productive, are also just equally amazing for scammers and things like that. And I think that's where the first bits of AI as such and kind of AI-based sort of spear phishing attacks will come from. They'll probably be harnessing technology that was meant for maybe customer relations or stuff like that, but then repurposed it to do other things. And all these third-party services have a real job on their hands, I think, to try and keep it clean and above board and stop abuse of it, and which is just rife, to be fair.
So I'm just thinking, is there a problem in that this level of fraud is just so small the insurance companies aren't going to care about it. Because let's say you get 50 of these claims a year as a single insurance company, and they're £1,000 a time. That's £50,000. You're operating at the level of millions being what matters. There's been a suggestion of investing in a human firewall, which is great, that would help. But the problem I can see there is the number of claims that you're dealing with. Pulling out that type of fraud, is it actually worth doing because of the expense of doing it? Or is it going to be something where until there's some automated way, it's not worth putting in a new process that might cause friction and upset customers, because losing 5 customers is worse than paying it out. It's not worth hiring someone to do it because it's cheaper to just pay it. Is it going to go completely under the radar because it's just not within or not a problem at the scale larger companies operate at?
There is one simple solution to this specific case. Of course, once you have this solution, you can find another way to bypass it. But for this specific problem, if you only block the outgoing emails for a company to the email that you know that is already registered, right? Let's say that you're speaking with company X again, and you make sure that your systems are not going to send any email to company X email box if that's not the registered email up front, then you are going to solve this specific issue. Because yes, the incoming email is coming from a spoofed email. That means that in a way that it will be harder for the organization to deal with it again, unless DMARC is set up correctly. But when you answer that, you can make sure that you answer the right email, and then the fraud will be identified very easily. So there is a very easy solution to this case specifically. But as you said, the problem is that sometimes the problem looks so big and scary, right? It looks like a chaotic problem that you don't even think that there is a very simple solution to it. And from my point of view, that's the issue. You sit in an insurance company and you say, listen, you have a problem here that with 500 cases will get to 500K. So someone sitting in front of you and saying, okay, 500K is not even the threshold for my most minor, let's say, risk that I have on my table. I'm not going to deal with that. And that's the problem, as you just said. So what should be the threshold for that? That's a good question. But I think that if we see those kind of attacks more and more, it will definitely get on the radar of those insurance companies, and mainly because of, from my point of view at least, the reputational damage rather than specifically the cost per claim. So I think that if something is going to change, it is going to be the reputational damage.
Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left now, but it sounds like we've actually you've pretty much suggested a solution. You'd say anyone who's handling claims, you can only email authorized customers. Anyone else, you can receive emails, do whatever you want. But anyone who's dealing with claims, here's the list of domains you're allowed to email. Anything else gets blocked and flagged up. Every email system I can think of that I'm familiar with makes that fairly trivial to do for a group of users. So in that case, given it is actually an easy fix, given it's probably a day's work for the email engineer or a security person or your domain admin to put that whitelist in, talking to marketing, raises another question of why is that not being done? And James, I'm curious on your view on this one, because it sounds like very much a people problem that this isn't being solved because it could be put in place.
Yeah, I mean, to actually do that, and we shouldn't see it now anyway. It's just been doing that would have saved us $50,000. Doing that would save you the potential of those $50,000 being $5 million type thing. I always kind of come back to the fact that the best time to make yourself more secure is when you don't have to. There's a lot less of pain. And that would see, obviously you couldn't do that and put in specific contacts at companies because people leave and that would just cause mayhem. But yeah, I mean, that is a pragmatic solution, that if you have insurance with company X that you lock in, right, we're only going to actually talk to that company. It seems a very small added safety net that's in there. And like you say, would stop this in a very pragmatic and kind of non-invasive. I can't think of a reason where that would be triggered by the company itself and, you know, cause reputation damage or similar. I mean, I guess some companies operate multiple domains and areas of the company, which could perhaps be a bit trickier. I mean, certain email solutions as well, you can probably put in the scripts that are used if they're fairly generic. And scammers like to use the same scripts. If one works for them, then they want to use that again. If you can find a way of flagging up the actual body content of the claim that comes in, it would be more likely to kind of highlight when things need to be, you know, forwarded on to be looked into a bit further. But yeah, I guess a mix of, you know, technology and process there, but to try and turn some of the technology up slightly seems the more pragmatic way of doing it. I don't know what the turnover's like in account handling and things like that, but yeah, I mean, you would think that if it was mainly associated with house damage, then you could hopefully get a bit of a common consensus around what would be triggerable and what wouldn't.
Okay. Well, I think we've answered that one. So I'm just going to ask a final thing. Final thing in the last few minutes. Ruby, I know the type of work you do. James, I know the type of work you do. If someone had put that solution in place, how would you test and validate it? Because I know you both specialize from slightly different angles on that sort of security testing, examination. Does your solution work?
I would probably just try bullying. I would pretend that I was on my private email address. I worked at that company. This is ridiculous. I may even CC in somebody that works at the company. I'm you know, somebody that will sort of go, oh yeah, please let him do this or whatever. Yeah, if you start making a lot of noise and sound like you've got a lot of confidence in what you're asking, then often that can sometimes tip the balance. But that would be quite a lot to do for $1,000, though. If you go into those sort of lengths, you think you would turn up the wick and go for at least 10 or something similar.
Okay, so that's the social engineer approach. Ruby, your method?
My recommendation is always try to bypass the technology and go directly to the people or to the person, right? So from my point of view, if I see the technology blocks me, the next thing that I'll do, I'll try to get the phone number of the person and call him, bypassing completely the email infrastructure, trying to make something on a different channel. I mean, from my point of view, I'm trying to test the process and not only the patch, right? So we need to see that the entire process works as we anticipated or expected. And when we recommend the fix also, we'll recommend a fix that is more very comprehensive process-wise and not only, let's say, email-wise. So for the same process, by the way, if I get a call for someone, the one thing that you need to do as an insurance company, you say, okay, thank you for your call. Let us call you back to the registered number and we'll take the call from there. And that will eliminate this path as well. But unfortunately, again, I can tell you that in our testing, we are doing this on a continuous basis with most of our customers, and our percentage of success is above 90%, 90. So we are very far away from, let's say, the commodity solution that will solve it, as you mentioned before.
I always forget phones exist. I'm so kind of that close to email. It's like, Jesus, yeah, you can speak to people as well, can't you?
I do wonder if that applies to the scammers as well, because I've noticed recently they're all using WhatsApp. None of them are doing phone numbers. It's always, what's your WhatsApp number?
Romance scams, they're actually, a lot of people don't think they are, but they're very open to getting on the other end of a phone and you know, sweet talking people. Apparently they use quite a lot of voice changes and things like that, or they just try and brush off they've got a bit of an accent from extended periods of work in certain places. But yeah, it's I think phones are kind of useful, but a lot of, especially the Western African scammers that we saw, they always sort of fell down, kind of suddenly transport their knowledge into kind of Western corporate culture. That's tended to be where the chinks started kind of in their armor started showing up. But they weren't quite, the language was just so flowery and verbose, it was ridiculous. Like 13th century regal kings rather than sort of a CEO that probably only puts down 5 or 6 words and no kind of sign off or anything like that. So not long giving them tips.
Right. Thank you. Quick 1-minute answer from each of you. What do you recommend companies do to pick up on things not just like this, but other potential attacks using the same vectors where individually they might be below the threshold they care about? Ruby, if you go first.
Yeah, so I think that when we come to an organization, we are not trying to solve only this specific issue, because then it would be, from cost efficiency point of view, not really attractive. So when we come to an organization, we are trying to really solve the problems in the organization from different security domains point of view: processes, procedures, operations, servers, endpoints, network, application, all in all. And then specifically the financial frauds part, right? That's something that we take into consideration in every one of our engagements. So it will be integrated anyhow in our program. So, working with us will get you covered, at least from the assessment point of view and the mitigation planning and implementation point of view.
And James, if you were testing to help a company close this type of thing down?
I mean, tech goes without saying, and I think process is such a, I mean, yeah, yes, awareness, but maybe not awareness in kind of the, click on this, oh no, you shouldn't have clicked on that type thing. Give a bit more of the story, either side of that. Try and explain give somebody a bit more of a handle on either side of what's happening at their touch point for when the crime's going on. I think people can understand the story a bit better and use that in their real life. But process is definitely one area where you can make the plausibility of what's being asked stand out. You can increase the contrast, I think, and a lot of companies that get sort of better tech ideally want to be protected as they are. Whereas I think if you're willing to make some kind of trade with the tech and tighten up a few things, then you can actually make your process, a lot harder for a criminal to sort of jump on the back of, I guess.
Okay, thank you both for joining me and talking this one through. It is one that I'm particularly interested in at the moment, and I know some people who are also going to be interested in it. We're just about at the right time now to let you both go. And James, I recommend an ice cream. It is boiling. And Ruby, enjoy your holiday. Thank you both for coming on.
I always thought that your background,
thank you very much,
was fake one, Jim. But somebody came on midway and took a book, and I was like,
it's a very long video. It's definitely not actually a book. No, I had a bookcase there before it was cool. But yeah.
Oh, it's good. I like it. Mine's a bit, I don't know.
Thank you both for joining me.